Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, and first we're going to talk about Kursk direction. During the previous 12 hours we received significant number of details about the clashes that have been taking place in this direction during the previous days, additional details that can give us a lot of interesting updates and the real understanding of what exactly is happening here right now. And of course the main clashes were taking place in the vicinity of the city by the name of Sudzha, or in the vicinity or inside of Sudzha agglomeration. As you can see, we have adjusted the map, we have added additional territories under complete Ukraine control, and the most interesting territory is this one, just a small block inside of the village by the name of Martinova. The Ukrainian sources published the video of the Ukrainian soldiers who were moving through the village, which confirms that Ukrainians did have control or do have control exactly in this village. We don't know for sure how exactly the Ukrainians entered the village, maybe through the village of Goncharova, maybe the Ukrainians entered this territory through Kurylovka, so we don't know for sure. The area between this small island and the Ukrainian mainland, let's call it like this, is considered as contested area, but probably there is a presence of Ukrainians. So now let's discuss about the details and events that have been taking place for the previous days that we haven't discussed in the previous videos. First of all, we have a lot of icons, a lot of geolocations. We have changes on the ground, we have changes on deployment map, and we have changes on the maps of different mappers, but sometimes some events haven't been included in any single report, but of course they took place during today, yesterday, the day before yesterday, and they are very important. That determines the situation on the ground. And today we'd like to discuss with you one of the episodes, not the episode, but the day of clashes that have been taking place in Sudzha for the previous 12 hours. First of all, according to this map and according to most of the mappers, the Russians have control over the saved control over the eastern part of Sudzha, and the most important, the Russians had the roads of supply that can be used to support the force inside. But telling the truth, and according to a lot of military experts, the current situation, the current maps that you've been seeing has nothing related with the reality. According to different analysis, different military expert, the current situation in Sudzha looks something like this, or at least this situation took place yesterday, and this is the situation that was yesterday, the day before yesterday. So if you take a look at this map, you're gonna see that the Russians were encircled in the eastern part of Sudzha. In this small block, the Ukrainians managed to encircle the Russians and to create a cauldron. But the main problem of this situation is that the southern flank, we are talking about this small block, wasn't stabilized by the Ukrainians, and it doesn't mean that the Russians had possibilities to use this small window for supply and support. The Russians didn't have this possibility as well, but this was the let's say not it was the easiest line that the Russians realized can break through any time. Anyway, there was a cauldron. Then the Russians were inside. So according to information we have, we are talking about the forces of 488th Regiment. So this is the situation, let's call it like this, at the beginning of the 10th of August, so yesterday, and then what was happening later. The Russians finished the concentration of first waves of forces inside of Большое Soldatskaya. The Russians managed to repel all attacks from the Ukrainian side. The Russians managed to concentrate the first group of forces, and according to information we have, the Russians finished the concentration of forces inside of Belitsa. We've been talking about this during the previous days as well. And then the Russians began offensive. The thing is that the question is why the Russians didn't attack the Ukrainians before that, why the Russians didn't attack and didn't make any attempt to unblock the Russians inside of the eastern Sudzha, let's say the day before yesterday, but just yesterday. The thing is that the road between, let's say, Belitsa and Sudzha, Goncharova itself, we're talking about, let's say, this road was mined by the Ukrainians using distance method of mining. So this territory was completely blocked, and the Russians couldn't use this because of this mining process. But the thing is that Ukrainians, according to maybe NATO standards, maybe were using NATO standards, mines, they self-destroyed within 48 hours. And as soon as the Russians realized that Ukrainian mines were self-destroyed within, let's say, a certain period of time, the Russians launched full-scale offensive operation from Belitsa itself towards the Goncharovka this way. And as a result of this attack, as a result of this road, the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt because the Ukrainians were relying on mines and entered Goncharovka itself. More precisely, the Russians managed to occupy the positions in the gray zone in the vicinity of this hospital. The sources are saying that, and by this attack we understand that the Russians managed to secure the southern flank of Sudzha, the southern flank of the Russian forces who were located in the eastern Sudzha, and that allowed the Russians to win some time and to give the forces of 488 regiments to counterattack the Ukrainian positions. And the Russians began counteroffensive towards the city by the name of Myrny, with the purpose to unblock themselves and to restore connection with the mainland. So what was happening next? On the other side, another Russian group of forces began moving from Большое Солдатское towards the city, towards Sudzha as well. But these group of forces were ambushed by the Ukrainians somewhere in this area. And the Ukrainians attacked the Russians in their flank. Of course, the group of Ukrainian forces wasn't so big, so the Ukrainians managed just to win some time. The Russians managed to repel, to defeat the Ukrainians, and after that the Russians continue moving further in the direction of Martinovka. Meanwhile, while the ambush process were taking place, some Ukrainian forces were also sent inside of Martinovka, and then there was a very close and very heavy combat exactly in the area of the village. The Ukrainians are saying that the Russians managed to, let's say, to cause damage to the Ukrainians and to force the Ukrainians to fall back to the southwestern part of the village. The Russians, on the other hand, managed to establish complete control over the northeastern part of the same village. So this is the situation in this direction. So while the clashes in Martinovka, the situation were developing very, very seriously for both sides in Goncharovka and inside of Myrny, because both forces, either the Ukrainians and the Russians, got encircled. The Ukrainians, as soon as they realized that their garrison was blocking the eastern part of Sudzha, conducted a series of counteroffensives with the purpose to destroy the Russian foothold in Goncharovka. And for these purposes, the Ukrainians sent the reserves of 61st Mechanized Brigade. They sent 92nd Battalion, 99th Battalion, and then there were very heavy clashes exactly in the area of the hospital. But the military experts are saying that as a result of very heavy clashes, the Russians were defeated. Some Russian soldiers were destroyed, but those who managed to survive fell back towards the mainland, towards the village, let's say, of Dmitriukov. So those who managed to survive fell back to Dmitriukov. And the Ukrainians managed to restore connections with the Ukrainian garrison, with the proxy Ukrainian forces, Russian Democratic Corps, that were located in Myrny. But the situation was very critical for this garrison, and the Ukrainians also decided to fall back due to high risks of being encircled by the Russians as a result, or due to the second attempts to attack. And the Ukrainians fell back towards the mainland, and as a result of all these clashes, as we can see, the Russians did manage to restore control with the mainland, and currently the eastern Sudzha is under complete Russian control. Not just the eastern Sudzha, but also the supply and support roads that are going exactly in this area. Now the sides are regrouping, and most likely today there are going to be more clashes, but now we can say that the Russians managed to secure the flanks, managed to secure in the rear, and now they can get additional supply and support for further counteroffensives. As we understand, the main purpose of the Russians for the next 24 hours is to attack the Ukrainians in this line and to force them to fall back from Martinovka completely. So most likely this is going to be the operation that we're going to see during the next hours. Now let's move further. Let's move to the western flank of Kursk offensive operation. Currently, the very heavy fire anomalies were spotted and discovered in the village of Nizapna and Byakhovo. So most likely the Ukrainians realized that the Russians don't have access to this territory due to, let's say, not very comfortable configuration of the line of combat contact, and the Ukrainians began offensive in this direction with the purpose to maintain the line of combat contact, to capture additional, say, villages and fields, and just to capture everything that located in the vicinity of Kulbaki. On the other hand, some Ukrainian, let's say, armored forces made a fast lightning breakthrough towards the village of Korenevo, and as a result of attack, the Ukrainians did manage to enter the village, did manage to enter the southeastern part of the village, this one, and the main purpose of the Ukrainians of that attack was to establish complete control over the bridges that goes from the northwestern part of Korenevo to the southeastern part. And for a very short period of time, the Ukrainians managed to do this, but later the Russians conducted a series of counteroffensives, and they forced the Ukrainians to fall back from this area, and the Ukrainians were defeated and fell back, and the Russians managed to restore control over the bridges. Later we got additional geolocation, additional video. Let's take a look at this video. And this video we can see the Ukrainian convoy. There is one tank and 4 personnel carriers, 2 personnel carriers or 3 personnel carriers, and some light vehicles behind. And when the Russians discovered this group, they start bombing and attacking this territory with Tornado S missiles. And according to the author of this video, the entire convoy of armored forces of Ukraine was destroyed. If we go back on map, we can make a conclusion that the Ukrainian convoy was moving something like this along this side of the forest, and the Ukrainians were trying to get here, but somewhere in this point the Ukrainians were attacked by Tornado S missile. Currently very difficult to understand what was the purpose of these movements. Maybe the Ukrainians were moving something like this. They were attacking from Nova Ivanovka to these positions, and after that from these positions the Ukrainians were trying to attack Kruglinka from behind. Maybe this was the reason of attack and the reason of movements of armored forces of Ukraine. But on the other hand, we see, but maybe sometimes we can say that this is not like logical. But if you remember, yesterday we got another video somewhere from the area of Anastasievka, Semenovka, how the Russians managed to discover another Ukrainian convoy and to destroy this convoy as a result of missile strike, as a result of Iskander strike. So maybe the convoy that was attacked today, according to the video that was published, maybe this is the convoy that's managed to survive after yesterday Russian attack of Iskander, and maybe the Ukrainians were just, those who managed to survive were moving back towards the village of Nova Ivanovka, and the rest of the forces were discovered in this point and also were attacked by Tornado S. So this territory is the most interesting one because this territory is completely covered with the fog of war, and we don't know for sure what exactly is happening exactly in this direction. As for Sudzha, more or less everything is clear. As for Korenevo, more or less everything is clear. But as for this territory, it's very difficult to understand the real line of combat contact and where exactly is the Ukrainian position, Ukrainian positions, and where exactly are the Russian positions. As for the southern flank, Sudzha flank, according to information we have, the Ukrainians managed to establish complete control over Guyeva to cross the river, and currently there are very heavy clashes in the outskirts of the village of Plechova. This information was confirmed by different mappers, yet according to information we have, the Ukrainians haven't managed to establish complete control over this village, but yesterday some sources were saying that the Ukrainians have already made this. Now let's move further, a little bit further in the southern direction. During the previous night there were reports about another breakthrough of armored forces to Ukraine, but later according to information we have, that was just speculation and just work of Ukrainian special forces to let's say to stretch Russian attention. Now let's move to the old line of combat contact. We have additional changes on the ground, and let's talk first of all about Pivnichne Zalizne. Today the Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were FPV droning the Russian forces inside of this village, inside of the city. In this video we can see a lot of geolocations, lots of Russian soldiers who were moving from one building to another, and some of those buildings were FPV droned by the Ukrainians. One of the episodes of Ukraine attack was discovered exactly in this area, and based on this video most of the mappers have adjusted their map, added additional area to Russian control. Now let's move to Pokrov's direction. We have additional, let's say, progress on the ground. According to different mappers, including neutral mappers and pro-Ukrainian mappers, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Ivanovka. So most likely today the Russians will try to secure the area completely, to clear the territory from Ukrainian forces, and after that the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation will announce about this victory. As for the Zhelane and villages further to the west, like Grodovka, Novogrodovka, during the previous nights we haven't received anything. We just received significant number of videos of how the Russians were continued destroying the Ukrainian armored vehicles and just the vehicles that were moving from Pokrovsk and Novozhelane. Lots of vehicles were destroyed, as you can see. Currently this is another living road or death road for the Ukrainians. Once again, if we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of month, we can count significant number of vehicles that were already destroyed exactly on this road. So something weird is happening here. The Ukrainians understand that this area, this road is no longer safe, but for some reason they continue using it. Maybe they don't have any other option for this. And now let's move further. We have additional updates from the South Donetsk direction. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions in direction of Vadiana. Few more tree lines, few more square kilometers were captured by the Russians. We have the videos of how the Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russian tanks and vehicles along the road. So the Russians are moving closer and closer to T0524 road, forcing the Ukrainians to think twice before, let's say, introducing additional reinforcements and reserves in Kursk direction. And of course, very interesting details we continue receiving from the border between Ukraine and Belarus. Today the Ministry of Defense of Belarus published the videos of how they were redeploying tank forces, armored vehicles and different equipment to Gomel and Mozyr regions. And of course this can't go, let's say, silently in between Ukrainians. They understand the risk and they understand that this separation can be conducted by under the false flag. Most likely these are forces of Russian Federation that being redeployed to the border, but the sources are saying that this is something like Belarus forces. Everything might happen, and something unexpected can happen exactly in the northern Kiev direction. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.